We had a fascinating session, guys. So we have to match up. I hope it was the first session. This was the first session, so that we did not have that competition. But be that as it may, it's I look around me, and except for Tuhin, who's a politician, I mean, it looks like a newsroom, and it looks like we have Tuhin in the newsroom, and we can all grill him about what the BJP is doing. But we are going to talk about something less interesting than politics, but as important. We are going to talk about history, writing books, and how journalists suddenly became historians. But let me start off by asking that, unveiling the past, that's what we have been asked to talk about. How difficult or easy is it to unveil the past? A lot have been written about the past already. We have accounts of British historians, our own historians. We had a very talented crop, whether talented or not, we'll discuss in the course of the event, crop of, but very acclaimed historians who have written about our past. So how do we unveil the past? That's the first part of the question. The second part is, why do you call yourselves historians again? Who among you is a trained historian? Utpal, you first.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me here. It's a pleasure being at Puri. Yeah, that's one question almost every day hurled at me also. I came out with my book, Eminent Historians. And I was told, but who are you? What gives you the credential to write a book on history? And I look back at the person, I said, because I love history. I've read history books for last 30 years, and I'm still reading it and loving it. A more serious answer to that would be, I had to write history because when I read history, I thought this history has been completely distorted and deliberately distorted. This is not our history. This is not Bharat's history. And for last 70 years, the history we have been taught is history of invaders, and that's really unfortunate because we as a society, as a state, as a nation, we look at ourselves through mirror of history, and when we look at our history and through the work of our eminent historians, quote unquote, the image we get is that we are a country of losers. No better than that. We have just lost a wash, we have nothing good to showcase. The reality, when I read history, when I think about it, it's just the opposite. History for me, like today, we are today, discussing about Bharat, discussing about history, and we are kind of going to become the third largest economy in the world. I think we have done better than what we claimed by our historians. We have won more wars then we have lost. Unfortunately, we are just told about defeats in our history. And that's a problem with me, Like, I'll just give you a few examples about, like we are told about Nalanda being ransacked by Bakhtiyar Khilji. We should know that history. I'm absolutely sure that we should talk about all the defeats. But we should also be told about some of our good things. Now, talking about Bakhtiyar Khilji, hardly anyone will know, very few will know that how he died. He lost a war against a Assamese king called King Prithu. Now, and he was defeated so decisively that his own generals killed him. Now, this is our history. We are not losers. Ultimately, our own people, they defeated that guy. We are not told about that. We are told about, Battle of Tarai, for instance, when in second battle we lost, Prithviraj Chauhan lost to Muhammad Ghori. But we are not told about, Naiki Devi, for instance, who defeated that tyrant so decisively that he refused to look back at India for almost a decade, or more than a decade. Now, these are our heroes, and you look at everywhere. So this history has been like that. Now, I'm sitting in the, I'm today in the land of Kalingan. It's an amazing, glorious history they have. Now, look at how history has also kind of been unkind to people of this land. Our own historians, I call them historians. Our historians projected a person called Ashoka the Great. Now, first of all, I have a problem with historian coming up and giving this certificate who is great and who is not great. That's not the job of a historian. Historian's job is to just write what is history. Let people decide whether he's great or not. One. And second thing, when you dig into that, you find that Ashoka's greatness is all fake. It was largely the creation of Nehruvian fascination for that man. And when we looked at, we realized that, for instance, one of the myths being spread in favor of him is that, after the Kalinga War, he saw so much of death and destruction that he converted into Buddhism. The reality is that he was already a Buddhist when he did all these things. So my point is, our history has been deliberately distorted. And I'm one person, I will say that I don't believe in the fact that, history, this is right history, this is truth. No, I believe that we all are just telling what we believe is right. And history will always be politicized. History will always convey what is the predominant feeling in the society at that time. Like today, nationalism is a flavor of the season. So we see certain kind of literature. I'm fine with that. That kind of subtle influences society will and the political milieu will provide. But I have a problem if deliberate distortion being created. And that's what has happened for the last 70 years. And I think we need to look into that.
So, Utpal, your book is, of course, a very important read to know that, how history had been twisted and turned to suit certain objectives. But to carry on with the same question, Tuhin, how I have been a fan of your writing, but from long ago. Not that I'm not a fan of your writing now, but how did you become a historian? You wrote very different things. What brought you to history?
Thank you, Deep. Thank you. A big thanks to the wonderful organizers of Puri Literary Festival for, this well thought of curation. No, I am not a historian. I have no pretense about it. As an author, I have experimented with multiple different genres. I started with writing way back in 2006. The first story was a complicated story of urban relationships. And from there on, political thrillers. But yes, at a certain point of time at around 2019-20, when I was already deeply entrenched in the political world, I was looking for a larger narrative. After around 7 or 8 books, I was looking for that one larger narrative which I could carry on over the next 3 years. And I will be honest over here that since I have an active political role, my writings are not immune from my political influence. So there is one character who keeps demonizing freedom fighters, left, right, and center, who keeps creating these divisions, my freedom fighter versus your freedom fighter, who keeps talking ill about Veer Savarkar. And I thought if this character can vilify Veer Savarkar, at some point of time, he will vilify our poor tribal revolutionaries. So before he does that, it's important to curate a narrative in favor of our tribal revolutionaries. And unfortunately, the Congress party, has a tendency to have, they almost behave as if they have a fiefdom over our freedom struggle. So the country, the present generation, the future generation needs to know that our freedom struggle predates the establishment of the Congress party by a good 120 years. So the first documented tribal revolution is of Raghunath Mahato in 1765 in the present-day Purulia region. The next big tribal revolution was of Tilka Maji in 1783 in the Bhagalpur region. So I think, to be honest, I would say I'm a narrative curator. Even the books, The Legend of Birsa Munda, while it is completely honest to the character of Birsa Munda, I figured out that there would be problems, there would be limitations in authenticating the characters of a lot of, secondary characters who were part of that journey. And therefore, while it is true to the character of Birsa Munda, some amount of liberty has been taken with the secondary characters. The villain, Father Hoffman, who Birsa Munda fought ideologically. Father Hoffman, who was the kingpin of conversion activities at that point of time in the present-day Jharkhand. So, like I say, I think, I don't consider myself a historian. I am putting forth, I'm trying to usher in a certain narrative. And I think from here, it's the job of historians to bring out properly authenticated non-fiction books on the life of Birsa Munda and other freedom fighters.
Well, Tuhin, I know politics demands a lot of your time, but you're a fantastic writer, and I told you I'm a fan, so we are not letting you say no to writing or to history anytime soon.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you.
Nandini, you are a fine journalist. I have known about your journalism. I have known you as a journalist for a while. What took you to history? And what do you call yourself now? Just a journalist or a journalist historian?
Thank you, Veer. Thank you, Deep. The thing is that I never call myself a historian. I always say I'm a hack. I'm a journalist. But I really feel that as a journalist, it gives you excellent training to write about history for the simple reason, and you know this, I mean, you're such a well-known journalist, you know this, that as a journalist, there are three things that you're trained to do, right? You're trained to talk to everyone. Whether you're talking to a CEO, you're talking to a politician, you're talking to the man on the street or the panwala, whoever, you are trained to talk to people. Number two, when you're doing a story, you do a 360-degree reportage. You don't just do one side, you're talking to all sides. And the third is you always look at the story as the central part of your narrative. Not the narrative driving the story, but the story driving the narrative. Now, these three things is this is what I have been trained in. This is what I bring to my history writing as well. And I actually took to history. I always feel that if you look at the word history, the biggest component of that is the word story. His story, her story, our story. And if we look at history as the story, rather than looking at whether this ideology or that angle needs to be fed into it, then it will become much more easy for young people, for people who are not necessarily historians or not necessarily part of the history ecosystem or cabal, to be able to absorb and accept and illuminate themselves with our past, with stories from our past. And that is pretty much what drove me to history. I mean, I am an English literature student. I'm not trained in history. I didn't even take history in college because history is taught so badly. The books are, we were discussing this before this panel, the books are so dry that if you read it, it is a certified antidote for insomnia. You're going to fall asleep. It is so badly written. So the whole point of me, when I found history, when I started reading history for fun, I said, my God, look at these stories. And why don't we know about these stories? So like Utpal was just talking about all the things that we have not been taught. I'll just take 2 seconds to talk about Rani Durgavati. Like, we've all been told that Akbar is the great. But how many of us know that Akbar was responsible for not one but 2 devastating Johars in his reign? The first was the Johar at Chauragarh after Rani Durgavati's son Been Narayan was killed. The second was the Johar in Chittor. And the Chittor Johar was preceded by the indiscriminate killing of 30,000 people. Nobody talks about that, and we talk about how Akbar became liberal towards the latter half of his life. But what about the liberal Hindu rulers who were his contemporaries, Rani Durgavati included, who had Muslim generals fighting for her and giving their lives for her? So there are so many angles. Tuhin has just talked about, tribal history. How many of us know that there were incredible tribal leaders like Raja Shankar and Raghunath, who were descendants of Rani Durgavati, who were part of the 1857 uprising, who were tied to the mouth of a cannon and blown away? We don't hear about them. We don't hear about the Bastar Revolution, for instance, where the perpetrators were caught by the British and flayed alive. We don't hear about that. So our history is so selective, so, one-sided, almost like myopic, in the way it has been taught, in the way it has been written. If it wasn't, then you wouldn't have required people like us. And there is such a lot of noise about Twitter Gyanis and how everybody is a historian today. I say, good, excellent, let there be more Twitter Gyanis. The more voices you have talking history, the better it is for all of us.
Moupia, what took you to Bhagmati? We need to hear that story. The story of you and the story of her. What sort of fueled your interest in telling the story of Bhagmati?
Okay, thank you, Deep, and thank you, the organizers of the Puri Literary Festival, to have invited me here. It is an absolute honor. It's so beautifully organized. So like Nandini was saying, for me, history, again, I'm a student of English literature, and what got me excited about the subject of history, I was always interested in history. But I think two things primarily, sort of pushed me into this realm, which I wanted to rediscover. Because again, like we all know, our history books are very dry and we are only taught certain things, and most of it we are not even aware of. So one is that when I married an army officer, I got the chance to travel all around India. And that was when I realized that there is a story waiting at around every corner. You turn a corner, there is a story waiting. So during my stay in Jhansi, where my husband was posted, he was of course at the front that time. This was the Parakram operations going on. So I stayed in Jhansi alone for a year. And from there is this little beautiful town called Orcha, which is in Madhya Pradesh. Jhansi is in Uttar Pradesh, and 20 kilometers away from Jhansi is this place called Orcha. Many of you may have visited it and heard of it. I hadn't heard of it. Despite history being one of my main subjects, I hadn't heard of a place called Orcha, leave alone a sprawling kingdom. Orcha was the Bundela capital of Bundelkhand, central provinces. And what really fascinated me, apart from the fact that the monuments there, the palaces there are absolutely amazing and the frescoes are still very well maintained and all, that it is along the river Betwa. It is a beautiful place. There are, several interesting legends attached to that place, which really fascinated me. Second was that this was such a wealthy and such a glorious kingdom, which lasted for a good 500 years, but we hadn't heard of it. Okay, so many of us again might have heard of a ruler called Raja Chhatrasal, for instance. He was the last well-known king of the Bundelas. Raja Chhatrasal was helped by the Marathas in early 18th century against the Mughal Subedar at that time, and as a result of which, and they won it, and as a result of which, Raja Chhatrasal handed over what is today we know as Jhansi to the Peshwas. So the Jhansi became a Maratha stronghold, as well as legend goes, his daughter Mastani. So there was no love story between, Bajirao and Mastani and nothing of the sort. It was a historical deal. Second thing was that the ruler of Orcha towards the 19th century became an ally of the British, which in itself is interesting. 20 kilometers away from Rani Lakshmibai was this female ruler ruling Orcha. Two women, Indian women ruling two different kingdoms under the sovereignty of the British Empire. One an ally, one an enemy. And using that, when Rani Lakshmibai was sort of thrown out from her palace and all that, the ruler of Orcha took advantage of that situation, took advantage of her vulnerability and attacked Jhansi. Have we read about this in our history books? No. But it is so interesting. And what is even more interesting is that if you watch the Sonet Lumiere show in Jhansi Fort and you watch the Sonet Lumiere show in Orcha, they're two completely different narratives. Because in Jhansi, they have highlighted the fact that Orcha had attacked them. In Orcha, they stop at Raja Chhatrasal. So these are nuggets and facets of Indian history, against the Indian regime, against the British, or against any other ruling class. Notwithstanding all that, these are nuggets, these are facets, these are aspects of Indian history, kingdoms which we do not know much about. That was one I got to know. Second was growing up in a Bengali household, more as a Probashi and as a, kind of a refugee coming from erstwhile East Pakistan. So we have this divide in Bengal called East Bengalis and West Bengalis. So
Bangals and Ghotis.
Bangals and Ghotis. There's an ongoing war between Bangals and Ghotis. And we Bangals are still East Bengalis are still very possessive, or that we own that, that we are Bangals very proudly. So at home, I used to hear a lot of stories about how our grandfathers left behind big palaces, and my husband's a West Bengali, and he always made fun of me, saying, you East Bengalis always had big homes and big, estates and all. All of you did. I said, actually we did. because I know my grandfather's father became mad when he actually lost his sanity when he had to leave everything behind. And these are stories, I do not have a lot of, my side of the family doesn't have a lot of wealth. We didn't have any landed property, we were not landed people because we left everything behind. So I used to hear stories about, my father was then brought up in Giridih and Hazaribagh in Jharkhand. That time it was Bihar. And how the common man, we've heard of Subhash Chandra Bose, we've heard of Gandhiji, we've heard of all the big netas and the leaders, but we've not heard of what the state of the common man was at that time. This was almost 100 years ago now. And when my parents were small children, in fact my mother was not even born. So that period which went on to our independence, that period which was just before our independence, in the 1930s and 40s, when the world was itself battling a huge crisis. India was battling its own, problems, its own wars. How the common man responded to Netaji's call, for instance. There were clandestine meetings, they used to get together in rooms, the adults, wondering, why the adults are so, the children used to wonder why the adults have got into this room and why is the room so dark, what is this hissing sound, which was the radio basically. And that time Netaji was traveling to Saigon, to Berlin, and his speeches were all banned across India. And the people in India that time used to hear his speeches clandestinely. And how that evoked a certain sense of patriotism in the children. So my book is called Khoka, in which the child of 10 or 11 is first initiated into the freedom struggle. So he goes to the local kacheri after a few days and throws stones at the kacheri, which was the hub of British, activity, and said, Bharat Choro, Bharat Choro. That was his way of getting initiated into the freedom struggle. So there are a lot of stories about Khoka. So I told my father, tell me more of these stories. And I got to know that, there are so many hidden stories about how Jagdish Chandra Bose came to the small town of Giridih and died there. And how the government of India had organized an entire train for, those who wanted to pay their last respects to go to Giridih. So there are beautiful stories all over. And I will talk about my latest book in probably your next question because I've spoken enough. But I will urge everyone, what Nandini said is so true, I want everyone to come out and talk about our history. And what is most important, I feel, is the different perspectives in history, which we've talked about, to a great extent earlier in our earlier sessions, that every perspective, every point of view is important. We should not just limit ourselves to what we've learned or what a certain narrative is or a certain ideology is. Let us just explore all the perspectives of history.
It's a passionate subject to talk about, debate on. So we'll break pattern, and like a good Adda session, which is famous in our part of the world. And we'll start with Nandini. Nandini, are there tools that you employ, we need to employ, and there are a lot of youngsters here and budding writers, hopefully, who need to employ when untrained historians decide to write history? Of course, all of you are fantastic storytellers. I praise Tuhin, but the rest of you also are fantastic storytellers. Utpal did a very important work, but from if you are going to move away from eminent historians to becoming eminent historians, are there some of the tools we need to pick up, employ, and also spread around so that others can do that too? So we'll start with you.
Thank you, Deep. So so I was just talking about how as a journalist we are trained to do certain things. I find that when I'm looking at history, like for instance for Rani Durgavati, I looked at her story as a story that happened 500 years ago. So it's still for me a new story, and that's how I approach it. So obviously, you look at the primary sources first. And in her case, some of the most important primary sources were Mughal hagiographers, people like Abul Fazl or Badauni and so on, and others like Ferishta, who was not a Mughal hagiographer, but still it was not a Hindu point of view. And then there are literary sources, numismatic sources, there are Sanskrit inscriptions, and so on. So that's your primary source. So that's like when you are interviewing somebody, you get some information, some data, that's your primary source. But that's not enough. If we have to look at history with fresh eyes, then one of the things that I found very interesting is to go to folk tales, folk songs, folk traditions, and talk to people and get those and incorporate those into the narrative. And here I'm going to take just 2 minutes to give 2 very interesting examples. Now, as a Bengali, we are 3 Bengalis over here. I'm going to give a small, 2-line doggerel, which is very common as a lullaby in Bengal. So this is how it goes. It goes like this: Sare gama padhani, bom pheleche Japani, bomer moddhe keute sap, British bole bapre bap. Which means basically Saregama Padhani, the Japanese are dropping bombs. There is a cobra inside the bomb and the British are running scared. This little doggerel, I have grown up hearing it because my mother used to say it at night time. And I used to find it funny because it's a whimsical poem. Years later, when I was in class 10 and my grandfather was talking about 1942-43, when all of Calcutta were running away to the villages because they genuinely believed Japanese bombs to be falling on Calcutta. Because around that time, London was facing the Blitz, right? So you see, you have a little nighttime sort of doggerel, which has at its heart history. And there are so many examples. When I was writing Rani Durgavati, for instance, I found so many examples like this. There are folk traditions. There's a very charming story about why were the Rajgons so prosperous? Why were they so wealthy? That is because, you see, they had a paraspathar. You see, they would take that paraspathar and they would touch all iron things and they would turn into gold. No, they didn't. But you see how local imagination remembers history. So I think we should, when we are writing history, one interesting way of doing it is to see what people remember and why they remember it that way. That's very important, because if we do that, typically a lot of history books have this sort of disconnect with the subject matter. They kind of say, oh, I am going to quote another historian and I am not going to go down and talk to the masses, because what do they know? But the problem with historians also, and I know I'm sticking my neck out on this, that, suppose I'm a historian and I say, Deep, outside the grass is not green, it is blue. And then Utpal will say, yes, Nandini has said it is blue, so it is. Tuhin will say, yes, absolutely, I have seen it with my own eyes. Moupia will say, not only is it blue, it is aquamarine blue. By the end of that chain, you will have other people saying it is definitively blue. It cannot be green. And that's how the whole, narrative becomes entrenched. And you cannot break it. You can't even go outside and see whether the grass is green or blue.
Tuhin will say it's saffron. But Tuhin, give me 2-3 quick tips on how to be a best-selling author. We all want to know. I at least want to know from you. How do you become a best-selling author and also writing on history?
There were different norms in the late 2006, 2007, 2008. Now the norms are very different. So now you need to have the buyback capacity. In those days, there were very few authors and there were very few books. Now, there are multiple authors and, like 80% of them are mostly in the game, because they also want to share a pie of the success of others. So, I think one just needs to be honest to the characters, the story. For me, like I said, since I'm not a trained historian, and I have dabbled with multiple genres, for me, the perspective of storytelling was very important. For example, the trilogy, Birsa Munda was followed by the great tribal warriors of Bharat, that was followed by Siddho Kano. Siddho Kano, like Birsa Munda, is again a novel, I would say, where we took every effort to be authentic to the characters of Siddho Kano. But again, a movement which was spread over 9 months, starting 30th June 1855, and it went up to a good February, March 1856. And it was a community-led movement. From the present-day area of Santhal Parganas, Sahibganj district in Jharkhand, right up to the outskirts of Kolkata, there were different regions which were rising up in different places, because obviously we didn't have the modes of communication that we have now. So word would spread about the sacrifice of one heroic character in one part, and 100 kilometers beyond that, there would be a fresh upsurge 1 month later. So it's very difficult to, authenticate all the incidents, because most of these, now history has always been written from the point of view of rulers. Subaltern history always faced that challenge to authenticate information, because most of these subaltern heroes became popular in hindsight, maybe 20, 30 years after they were gone. So for example, again, coming back to Birsa Munda died in 1900, 9 June 1900. But the Chota Nagpur Land Tenancy Act, which was a landmark legislation brought by the British in favor of landholding rights of tribals, that was in 1908. But it is attributed to that movement, because somewhere in hindsight, Britishers felt that unless we take some corrective measures, a fresh uprising would, similar to the revolution of Birsa Munda, would take place once again. So subaltern history writing has always, had its challenges, and that is where I took the middle path, where I fictionalized some of the secondary characters while being honest to the primary characters. To each his own. I think that the honesty of your narrative, the honesty of your storytelling is what counts in the end, and the idea is to acquaint the younger generation present here and across the country that there is a part of history which has been shielded from you, which it's high time you get yourself acquainted with that part of history.
Utpal, I'll tweak this question a little bit for you. So my friend Utpal is not just a fantastic writer, he also has a very enviable job as the opinion editor of Firstpost and News 18. He also, for whoever wants to write, he also is in charge of books. So Utpal, my question to you is, when you, and there is a lot of interest in history writing, rewriting history, unveiling the past, when you get new books, what is that one thing as a hard-nosed critic that you look for when you see somebody attempting to write history with a fresh perspective? What is a big yes and what is a big no?
Deep, both as a books editor and also as somebody who loves history. I'm not a historian. I love history. That's why I write on that. I believe that a person writing the book also, and as an editor also, when I see it, the basic thing I see is the intent. I think intent matters more than anything. See, you have to be a good writer to write a book, and that's given. But if your intent and you are honest about what you're writing, I think that's fair enough. If your intent is good, I think I don't care about whether you're a historian or you are just a storyteller. And I believe that, I wanted to emphasize on who is a historian after all. And that's a very intriguing question, because, by the parameters set by somebody called Jaduna Sarkar, who is the doyen among historians, most of the today's well-known historians won't even qualify to be a historian. Like, Jaduna Sarkar said that for being a historian, and he was a master of medieval Indian history, he said that you need to know all the languages verbatim. He was very strict about that. By that standard, Romila Thapa is not a historian of ancient India because she doesn't know Sanskrit. But do we ever question her? No, because that's called ecosystem. The ecosystem is supporting her. Now, I get this question every now and then, but why are you writing on that? But do we ever question Ramchandra Guha writing book on history? No, he's also not a historian at the end of the day. But I don't question him writing. He writes very readable book. William Dalrymple writes very readable book. You may agree, you may disagree, fine, but it's a very readable book. So I'm fine with that. But the question is the people who question a particular set of people, saying that, oh, but you are not a historian. But they're very okay with when Ramchandra Guha comes out with the book. So I think that's where I believe, and as a books editor also, I see that. I see the intent is good. I see that, he's trying to reach out to the perspective with freshness, with honesty. And I'll give you an example here. I didn't agree with what Arun Sauri wrote in Savarkar book. I wrote a very scathing piece, and he got mad at me in a Barkha, so he almost called me a foolish person. But I believe that what he wrote about Savarkar was right. I don't deny that. Savarkar was a man of contradiction. But does that make him an unpatriotic person? No, it doesn't. We all are contradictory in many other ways. Gandhi was contradictory. Gandhi contradicted himself. So was Nehru. So was Patel in so many ways. So that's what human. Our gods are not perfect. Our gods have made so many mistakes. Don't we go and worship our gods? We do worship. So my thing is, if the intent is good, Savarkar's intent was good. Savarkar gave his life for the good of nation, he might have had some personal issues where he wanted to self-promote himself, as Rusori says, fine. But does this take away what his contribution was for this country? No. So that's what I do. As a books editor, I look at the intent of the author. If the intent I find good, and if he's digging into new grounds, he's trying to find out, spread the intellectual bandwidth, I'm okay with that.
So we broadly agree that going back to primary sources, intent and readability, catering to readability are some of the qualities that one need to have to write on history. Okay, let me now queer the pitch a bit. Eminent historians is, I'm not plugging the book, or am I? But
thank you for that.
Please read all of them. Fantastic writers. But Moupia, tell me that are we not guilty of what Utpal has accused some of our predecessors of being? Are we also not picking and choosing? And God forbid, if Tuhin's party is not in power several years down the line, will our work be taken seriously?
Actually, you mean to say that because we are not accredited historians?
No. I'm saying that are we not, we dealt with that point of who can be and cannot be a historian. That's understood. What I'm saying, are we or are we not also guilty of picking and choosing figures from history to choose, to sort of put forth our narrative? Like we accuse historians, writers of the past of doing.
I wouldn't use the word guilty to begin with. Because for me personally, I have chosen characters or stories which I found interesting. Secondly, I found a different perspective in those stories, a different narrative. You know, like when I explored am I on the right track?
Absolutely.
This is what you're asking, right?
Yeah.
So when I started, like I found a particular subject interesting. Like I said, I found this town of Ocha interesting. When I started exploring and researching, I realized that, there are a lot of things which we don't know. So I don't see how we can term ourselves guilty. I don't agree with that at all. Okay, and secondly, now say for instance my latest book, Bhagmati. Bhagmati has a very interesting premise. This is about the Qutub Shahi dynasty of Hyderabad, what was originally Golconda. And they ruled for about 200 years approximately. And their fifth Sultan, Muhammad Quli Qutub Shah, has built the city of Hyderabad. Now, I have lived in Hyderabad for 4 years. When I went there, more than anything else, I found the name Bhagmati crop up. Okay, now, I would ask myself, who is this Bhagmati? I don't see her anywhere. I don't see her in the memorials. I don't see her in the tombs. I don't see anything written about her. I don't see anything, no inscriptions, no primary. At that point, I found nothing in the city of Hyderabad which would talk about Bhagmati. Yet, every person in Hyderabad had heard about Bhagmati. The Sound and Light show in Golconda Fort started about the love story of Bhagmati and Muhammad Quli. And her very absence, her presence, I would say, is conspicuous by her absence. The fact that if you go to the necropolis, if you go and see all the tombs of the Qutub Shahi rulers, you'll find only her tomb missing, including her daughter's tomb, which is there, So then I started researching. I said, why is Bhagmati missing from history? Why is she missing? But in folk tales, in hand-me-down tales, in oral tradition, she's everywhere. There are songs about her, there are dance dramas about her, there are plays, there are movies about her, but she is missing from actual history and the historiography of the dynasty. She's nowhere there. So that is when I started exploring about Bhagmati, and it became a very controversial topic because I found the city divided ideologically on the basis of Bhagmati's absence and presence, because originally when I went back to the primary sources, I realized that the city of Hyderabad was known as the city of Bhagnagar. Okay, and there are records of Bhagnagar in the Maratha, history, in the Deccan histories, even in Akbar's court, Abul Fazl, as Nandini was talking about, his biographer, Abul Fazl, his brother Faizi, everybody's mentioned Bhagnagar. So when did Bhagnagar and how did Bhagnagar disappear? You know, so that, now I wouldn't say that I have picked her up randomly, or, you know, I would expect some sort of, reinforcement of my subject in any way. It is just that I found a different perspective. I found some certain interesting things about the subject, and that's why I went ahead with it. Have I answered your question correctly?
Yes, yes, of course. Nandini, we often, and I'm going to say it out loud, we often, I at least do, we say that Marxist historians had these very easy heroes and villains, the victorious and the vanquished. Are we just trying to reverse the trend, or are we being fair to history? Because history does not, if you look at history, history does not have very easy heroes and villains. Most figures of history are very, as Utpal was saying about Savarkar, most heroes and villains of history are very, very complicated. Gandhi, for instance, it remains an enigma because, he literally contradicted himself in the same period of time. So what he thought about the caste system when he wrote for Harijan, he wrote one thing. When he wrote for a Gujarati, he wrote completely opposite at the same period of time. I mean, views can evolve over time. Including race. So my question to you is, are we not hopefully guilty of that?
Look, Deep, I mean, I always believe that every book is a POV, all right?
Yes.
Every book,
yeah,
including sacred texts, every single book is a POV. So, am I guilty of choosing a character I find interesting? Hell yes. Why not? It's my POV. You don't agree with me? Please publish your own POV. But I don't mind, because for me, these are the characters that I find interesting. And these are the characters who have not had their voices heard so far in mainstream history. Rani Durgavati, for instance, has not had a single biography written on her, ever. So, yes, I find her interesting. I will always look for feminist icons in our past, in our ancient and early medieval past. Absolutely, that is my POV. And as a writer, I think I'm entitled to that. As far as what you're talking about, that we tend to look at our heroes in binary terms.
Yeah.
True. Why not? My point is, why not? This is the only country on the planet which takes actual historical figures and turns them into gods. We have a Shivaji Mandir near Kolhapur. It is a temple, it's a living temple where people go and pray to Shivaji. We have Rani Durgavati, who is constantly called Ranchandi. Teri nana mor nana Ranchandi jo aaye, Rani Durgavati jo aaye, unke charan le lo pakad. You are talking about a living, breathing historical character and turning her into a goddess. Which other culture does that? Why should we adopt Western ideas of being impartial? Why? We are different.
The only problem with that is then the same argument can be applied to Marxist historians, because you can't then say anything about Gandhi. But you should. You can't say anything about Ambedkar, but you should, like you should about Savarkar.
No, that's a POV. I'm saying
it's a POV, but the problem with deification of any historical figure is that then you somehow make that person immune to any criticism at that point in time or later, like it happened in the Nehruvian era. And my fear is it continuing in the Modi era?
I don't think so. I'll give you a reason why. See, because when you turn people into the greats, you have to necessarily, if you're raising someone, you have to lower somebody. We've seen that happen with, say, Akbar. It's a very good case in point. Akbar was an unusual monarch. My point is, he was not the only unusual monarch in medieval India. But my point is that when you are a biographer and you're looking at a character, I'm not saying that you have to not document their not so savory, or maybe their mistakes. I'm not saying you don't document them. I am saying you don't necessarily have to doff the Western cap and highlight them. You know, the Western mind will look at a saint and say, oh, but when that saint was a child, he abandoned his wife. Like, you know, if you look at Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we will look at him as a saint and as his stature as a saint, but the Western mind will say he walked out on Vishnu Priya. We don't need to do that. We can document it without taking, you know, that to be the main focus.
Tuhin, slightly different question for you. Subaltern history, and this is a subject you know well. When you go into subaltern history, you also look at historical injustices that has been perpetuated. How difficult a terrain is it to navigate? And your tips on anybody who wants to delve into subaltern history.
How difficult is it?
How difficult a terrain is it to navigate? You know,
Like
there are sensibilities involved.
Authentic sources of information are sparse, and that makes it quite challenging. But at the same time, like I said, with all the limitations, the reason why we need to attempt it, the reason why we need to tread that zone is if you realize, you know, after writing the book, in fact, on 15th August 2023, I had traveled to the birth village of Birsa Munda, along with a group of local NGO from Ranchi, and distributed Hindi copies of Birsa Munda to them. Now, I was shocked when I looked at the condition of his descendants, or, you know, the present generation of Adivasis living over there. Almost 90 to 95% of the village had converted to Christianity. There was massive malnutrition. You know, many of them had stunted growth. Now, unfortunately, apart from a couple of people, barely, and one of which was a descendant of Birsa Munda, not many were aware of their enlightened ancestry. So if, you know, the present generation of Vanvasis and Adivasis are not aware of the greatness of their ancestry, you can imagine they become easy influences to Marxist thought processes. You know, they become vulnerable in certain areas to Naxal influences. And I think this illumination, this enrichment, even if it is, you know, like with all your limitations, ideally, like I said, my book should set the foundation for authentic history books to be written around these characters, which at some point of time should be necessarily incorporated in the course curriculum. But I think, you know, I think in all responsibility, in all fairness, I think it was a calling for me. I had to tread that zone, and with a lot of care, I think I have done justice to it. And one of the reasons was also personal for me. I have grown up in Jamshedpur, you know, which was surrounded, even though it was an industrial town, it was surrounded by tribal hamlets. Now, there were 3 or 4 chowks in and around, you know, in both the Jamshedpur and Ranchi, which were named after Birsa Munda. There was a lot of curiosity to know about the great character. But unfortunately, there were never any, you know, authenticated sources of information. Hearsay would be the mode by which we would get to know about these characters. So I think, you know, at a particular stage of my life, I thought the best journey is the journey inwards to discover, you know, discover the knowledge which remained unquenched, or that curiosity which remained unquenched while I was growing up. So that was my initiation and journey into the world of subaltern character.
Utpal, when you take a hard look at the past and what the retelling of the past has left out before us, there are also old fissures you reopen. Like, for instance, take the film Phule, right? I mean, it's you wanted to talk about the life of Phule, but there was a lot of social pressure to exclude certain bits. Now, the easy thing, of course, is to say that, you know, Marxists left this out, and, you know, there was too much stress on Mughals, too little stress on Indic values. That battle is an easy battle to fight. But what about tougher battles, and how do we navigate that space? Battles about caste, battles sometimes race, unsavoriness of established heroes of history who, whether in Marxist times or in current times, have been deified. How do you think we should navigate that space? Especially because you are an active journalist and you see these debates and you report the stories.
Deep, I believe that, you can't evade the truth. If something happened in the past, there are two ways you can do it. Either you ignore it, nothing has happened, or you examine it, go deep into that, find out why it happened, and do the course correction. There are two ways. What we have done till now, mostly, is that we have, if there any fissure, any incident which we think that we're going to create a communal problem, for instance, we have tried to project that it has not happened. And that's why, someone like Aurangzeb becomes secular for us, Tipu Sultan becomes super secular for us. Because, we try to impose the belief that, by showing the mirror to Aurangzeb, we might, put today's Muslim into the line of fire, which is wrong. You are judging today's Muslim. They have nothing to do with what Aurangzeb did. I think we need to be very clear on that. And most of the people of this country are smart enough to know the difference. But our historians or our powers that be, they somehow found the easy way out. They thought that, okay, let's not talk about it. And there was a famous, Bengal curriculum, this thing in the late 80s, where they said that don't talk about any atrocities in medieval India from Muslim rulers. Now, if you don't talk, then what you are doing? You are just trying to put a upar malham from the top. That jo ghaav hai, ghaav to wahan hai. You are not trying to deal with that. And to deal with what happened in South Africa, for instance, that you first go have a truth inquiry. Just find out what happened. Just reach out to the grievances, people who have been hurt, and deal with that. And then you go for reconciliation. The problem in Bharat, what has happened, that we have gone for the reconciliation without even touching to the truth part. And that's why that's why you see in 1950s we have a film called Mughal-e-Azam, and 2025 we have a film called Chhawa. Because our oral tradition, public memory is very strong. It will come back in a very scathing manner. Look what Chhawa has done. And that's
a very good point, yeah. Mel Gibson once directed, he researched and directed a film called Apocalypto, if you remember, long ago. And a very interesting incident happened while he was promoting his film. So he went to a university, and while he was talking about his film, somebody got up and said, "Oh, that's not our history." So he said, "Well, then you write yours, make your own film." So Moupia, my question to you is, suppose, you must have spent agonizing days, weeks, months over Bhagmati, Suppose at some point in time, somebody does a book where Bhagmati is not a hero, but a villain. Not a hero, but a villain. How open will you be to read that book and engage with that writer?
Actually, that's a completely different perspective to consider Bhagmati as a villain, as a negative character.
What if they were to pick up some aspects of her life, and that it's not fully untrue, and build on that, build a character on that?
Okay, can I just deviate a little, and probably I will talk about Bhagmati, but before that, can I talk about Rani Lakshmibai in that context?
Please do.
Yeah. Okay, so now we all know about Rani Lakshmibai as a warrior queen, like Rani Durgavati. But the difference is that she's not really been, installed on a pedestal as a goddess yet. On the contrary, what I found very interesting was, and this has not been told to us, nor has it been talked about, is that Rani Lakshmibai was a fantastic diplomat. Now, these are aspects of Rani Lakshmibai which are not projected. Okay, so when you're talking of a negative aspect of her life, there is in this one British, it's a primary source, a British officer at that time had commented that she was known for her piety, and she was a very religious woman. She used to do all her prayers and everything in the morning and dress very simply. But one of them had mentioned that she used to tie her sari in a very provocative way. Okay, now nobody would like to accept that. But at the same time, that person also probably was aware that this would not go down very well, because in India, she is kind of revered. In a different way, but she's revered. She's highly respected. So he said, but This she did not do to provoke. She wore it seductively because she knew her enemy. She knew she had to contest at a level where she could not be regarded as just a, an antagonist. So she was using different aspects of her personality to counter the British. On one hand, she would draft letters to Lord Dalhousie, which she had employed a British lawyer, but she was not happy with his skills, so she decided to draft those letters herself. She was an excellent she had a legal head, she had excellent knowledge of all the legalities, she was a very good diplomat. Word to word, she would speak with the British officers who would be sitting at the other side of the parda. But at the same time, she knew that she did not hesitate to present that womanly, that feminine side of her. And when the time came, there were times when, the British would not agree to something she wanted, and she would say, okay, I'm going to leave Jhansi and just go away. And then, she used to use that tactic very often, and the British would get scared. They were up against a very formidable lady, okay, who was using every tactic. So this is what I mean, that we have just seen her as a warrior, but she had many aspects, not all of which were probably, which would go down well with the so-called, moral, the standards of morality. But she did not break any standards, that also I will say. She was very much within her limits, she was very careful, she was very clever, she was a strategist. Bhagmati, on the other hand, had no presence, despite being the only queen of a medieval Muslim sultan and having a female heir. She has no visibility. So there is no question of her negative or positive aspects coming out because she has been wiped out from history. And this is largely due to the Persian influence and the Persian court during the Sultan's, during the Qutub Shahi ruler's time. Her entire existence has been wiped out. Again, not because, I wouldn't say, after reading a lot, the primary sources as well as, other opinions, I wouldn't say that she was obliterated or removed or made invisible only because of her religion. Because her, Muhammad Quli's mother was also a Hindu from Vijayanagar, but she was a princess. So to say that it is only us who are into caste and class is not correct, because the Persians very clearly removed her from the scene, also because of her class, because she was a dancer. So she was, in fact, I was just talking to Nandini this morning, and I was telling her about a small incident that happened when I was in Hyderabad researching. I'd gone to this, a kind of a cemetery which was set up by Mir Momin, who was Muhammad Quli's prime minister at that time, Persian prime minister. He had set up this burial ground for free, for poor Muslims. And there, a man was sitting in an intact office who was not really part of the intact, but he was just sitting there. And when I started talking about Bhagmati, suddenly he stopped me and said, "Aapka agenda kya hai? Aap kya dikhana chahte ho?" So I said, "Hum kuch nahi dikhana chahte, I just want to know about Bhagmati." So he said, in the 21st century, that even today, we will not accept Bhagmati as a queen because she is a dancer. So it's not just 500 years ago, it still very much exists. This class across religions, across, different sects, this caste thing does exist. We can't just say it's limited to only Hinduism.
One quick question to all of you before we throw this open for some questions from the audience. Would you, starting from you, Tuhin, would you be willing to, your wonderful wife and I were talking about a project, it's early days yet, but would you be open to historical fiction, writing historical fiction, given such a compelling writer that you are, where some of the greats of history are turned into heroes and villains, not very conveniently, given the storyline?
Well, my writings are increasingly getting fewer. I'm writing fewer books. So, like I said, fortunately, 2020, when I finally embarked upon Birsa Munda, that was a COVID lockdown period, so which gave a lot of time to do justice to it. The idea is whichever book I take up, obviously history fascinates me, and I would like to take up some of these characters because a lot of these characters have been written from the point of view of Mughals attacking them rather than them being shown as heroes. But whenever I take them up, I would obviously need to be convinced that I have the time and the dedication to do justice to it. Birsa Munda, has achieved a certain acceptance, which there have been other books on Birsa Munda, but most of them, like one of them was written by an IAS officer who served in the then, IAS officer of Bihar, who served in one of the adjoining districts, Khuti and and other districts in late 1960s. But despite there being 4 or 5 books, none of them had the canvas, none of them had the nurturing which this book has had. So similarly, if I approach another historical character, I need to be convinced, that I have the time and I have the dedication. So maybe it happens much later in my, any case, I have not had a conventional career. I became an author at 29. Now, maybe, I approach these books with a fresh perspective 10 years later.
Utpal, there was this fascinating passage in Sanjeev Sanyal's The Revolutionaries, where this meeting between Savarkar and Gandhi. And Gandhi was in London to meet Savarkar, and Savarkar was frying prawns. And he offered it to Gandhi, and Gandhi said, no, there's a lot of mischief we can do with historical fictions, not so much with biographies or with, non-fiction. Are you open to getting historical figures into non-fiction books?
I think that will be challenging, and I don't mind. But I have not thought about that. But one thing I can tell for sure that I'll somewhere do my next few works in history only, because I believe that a lot of things has to be told, and told in my own way. And I must tell you here that I don't believe that what I'm telling is truth. I'm just telling what I believe is right, and I'm honest about that. It is for the readers to believe whether it's right or wrong. And that's where, I believe your question that, are we influenced by our environment, or are we also judged by the way, leftist historians are judged? Of course we will be judged. But all I want that there shouldn't be a censorship. Let it be open for the readers.
That's a very good point.
Let thousands of flowers bloom at the same time. Let everyone read everything, and then they decide. I think that's the minimum we want. We shouldn't claim that I own the truth, or Romila Thapa owns the truth, or Arun Sawhney owns the truth. That is on the readers to decide. Our job is to write, and write faithfully or honestly.
Romila Thapar cannot own the truth. She doesn't know the language. So, but Nandini and Moupia, historical fiction, your take on it?
So, Deep, honestly, I cut my teeth into writing history with historical fiction. I mean, my first 3 books, the Gupta Empire trilogy, was about Chandragupta, Vikramaditya, Samudragupta, and Skandagupta. And the book that I got the Bal Sahitya Award for in 2024 is about animals in history who have a voice. So I love historical fiction, and in fact, I truly believe that it is a very easy way to enter history. Honestly, I got interested in history because as a child, I used to read, and my mother used to read to me historical fiction written by Sharadindu Bandyopadhyay, who is a brilliant writer of historical fiction. He wrote Tungabhadra Tire, or on the banks of the Tungabhadra. Years later, Moupia and I and my brother went to Hampi, and it was like I knew the place. So that's what historical fiction can do. It can give you an immersive experience of history, which non-fiction cannot, because you have to stick to annotated facts. But historical fiction can give you an immersive experience of history. I'll take 2 minutes to quickly tell you. I was having a conversation with our common friend Alo, and she was asking me, how do you know about British history? You've not done history in college. So how do you know? I said, oh, very interesting. That's thanks to historical fiction. People like Bernard Cornwell, people like Philippa Gregory, people like Hilary Mantel. These are the people, Walter Scott. You read them and you get a very good potted idea of British history. You don't have to read a history book. So it's a very easy way, easy entry. And once you're interested, Then you go ahead and do your research.
Moupia, last words before we throw it open.
Historical fiction actually, thanks Deep, historical fiction actually is the best way to reach out to your readers. You know, I feel, because you're telling a story. So story, like Nandini said, it can get very descriptive, like, you know, about the place, about the ambience, about, you know, you create that ambience, that kind of an aura, that kind of an atmosphere. So I feel readers very easily relate to that, and they get intrigued, interested. So it's a very good approach, you know, and a route to reach out to your readers when you're telling a story. With, of course, some facts you cannot, you know, tamper with. You have to stick to certain facts. Like you can't say the first War of Independence happened in 1830. You know, you have to say it happened in 1857, and those facts you cannot, you know, tamper with. But the point is that you can tell those things, these events, in a nice, interesting storytelling way, storytelling route. My two books, out of the 4 books, 2 books are non-fiction and 2 are non-fiction. Bhagmati is very much non-fiction. My first attempt at non-fiction actually, and I got stuck because there was no information on Bhagmati. Absolutely zero information. Like I said, she's been wiped out of history. So where did I get all the information from? But I personally, if you ask me, I am a historical fiction reader. And like she said, you know, it gives you a fantastic insight. And again, most historical fiction writers are unbiased. Okay, they're giving their own perspective. So you're not really following an ideology. They're, okay, this writer thinks this way, so you are, you know, forced to think on those lines. No, she or he is just telling a story with the facts. So that's how I feel historical fiction works better with readers, unless, of course, you want a very objective view and different perspectives. So that's when non-fiction comes in.
We can go on, but I think we'll take some questions. No questions? Okay. Thank you. It's been fantastic. I mean, like I said, it had to be an adda and not a serious session. I had a great adda. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Deep, and thank you, Puri Literary Festival.
Thank you, Deep, and I think you should write more, because being Hindu in Bangladesh was very precocious. I think you had warned about it way before the genocidal stuff happened over there. So I hope you write more.